Hey there. I know you might be wondering why you have a GIF of Iron Man flying across your screen. Well, this is a visual representation of how I feel every time I launch a serverless function that does a particular task. So today we're going to be talking about serverless and how it gives you wings. And the other side note is a question I always ask myself, like where do all the functions go? Like after we hit deploy, what happens to them? How are they optimized for us? But I have 10 minutes, so let's make the most out of it. My name is Obinna Ekwuno. I'm a developer advocate at Cloudflare, and you can find me on Twitter at Obinna Speaks. I also function as a technical editor at A List Apart. So this is a tale of two developers. I'm sure that if you're a front-end developer, you must have been in this situation where you have to set up a proxy server to kind of consolidate all the API requests that you're making into one server. And at this point now, you're moving a little bit away from like your front-end UI creation and moving into creating proxy servers. And it always ends up in a place where there's a lack of ownership. And from my experience with lack of ownership with products or services, it always ends in a burnout where people are wondering, okay, who owns what? I mean, whose dog? I mean, proxy server is this, right? And then you see yourself like creating services that go away from like the front end development confines, and then you keep on like building and learning new stuff that makes you wonder like who am I turning into? I'm learning Docker to like make sure that when I build this or deploy like the local is in sync with the production container, and then learning Kubernetes to like scale and deploy and all of this, and then you're wondering, am I still a front end developer? Like what is front end development? Like have I moved away from this? Am I now something else? And it doesn't end at just building, right? As soon as it gets to like a point, for example, if you're maintaining an e-commerce store and there's a spike, like if there's a sale on the product, you start to see like all of these new users coming, and then now you're worried about scaling because you're in charge of the writing, the deployment, the scaling, and everything. And you probably have this expression every time somebody says, "Oh, look, we're taking 50% off a very popular product." The complexity continues to grow as your user base or your site begins to grow because now, like I said, you are in charge of every time there's a backend change, you have to update your proxy server, which in turn updates your UI, which in turn you have to like deal with the deployments and the scalability, which causes a problem. Now, mostly serverless comes with a promise. A promise is that do what you can, focus on what you will, and I will take care of the rest. We have different platforms that support this. I'm sure you've heard a lot about them today. We have AWS, there's Azure Functions, there's Cloudflare Workers, there's a lot of these services, right? And mostly my own implementation, my own story of using serverless has been in the Jamstack space. And I feel like it kind of gives me that superpower that I spoke about in the beginning. It makes me feel like Iron Man because I can do some setting functions that handle specific things in my code without having to like involve the back end person. And also, the more spikes that I get, the more it scales with it, and I only have to pay for what I use per request. And like I said, you can focus on your business logic and leave the scaling to the experts. My own weapon of choice is Cloudflare Workers, and there are certain reasons why I prefer to use Cloudflare Workers. Not just because I'm a developer advocate. I'm here to tell you some of the advantages of using Cloudflare Workers as your serverless platform of choice. So usually, if you use a request based, or for example, another like say an example AWS Lambda, you would deploy your serverless functions. Maybe let's say you built a function to like populate an Airtable, and every time somebody is like requesting from that function, it's going to go to a particular region because you deploy these functions to particular regions. But imagine if like somebody, if you deploy to like a region, let's say you're running an e-commerce store and you say, okay, cool, majority of my users are in the US, so I deploy to the US, North America, right? But you have a user in Australia whose cousin just messaged him about this site that he can check out. Now he's making requests all the way from Australia to the US to get to get your service working, right? He might not notice this, but he's paying over the cost overhead. Now, imagine if it was possible to deploy these functions and have them run everywhere at the same time. That's where Cloudflare Workers thrives. So I'm just going to quote Laurie Voss by saying, so he said, Cloudflare Workers has changed the way we build our applications. We don't need to think about regions. We just deploy code and it works seamlessly around the world. And I'll explain why. So Cloudflare has what we call the edge network. So what this essentially means is that it's the same network, it's the same, it runs on the same V8 engine as like the browsers. But what it does is that every time you fire up you created Cloudflare function, it doesn't just run in a particular region. Instances of that function is run around Cloudflare's edge network, which is like a series of like is in different regions, and all of that's like your function exists in all of these regions. So therefore, when somebody makes a request, it just goes directly to the closest one to them and gets that request. So you don't have to like deploy to a particular region, and people don't have to pay that over cost. So this is an example of a Cloudflare function. The difference between using the Cloudflare worker versus other serverless providers is that other serverless providers use containerized processes. So each time an instance of a language runtime is run, workers pay the overhead of JavaScript runtime once at the start of the edge container. What this essentially means is that I know you're wondering, oh, if the functions are in every node, then every time a function is called, I have to start calling them separately, and that's a lot of overhead cost. But no, the process overhead is run once, and your code is made available to everybody. And I know that you might be wondering, what does this even mean? Like, what is the point of all of this, Obinna? And what I'm here to tell you is that you too can become Iron Man. Essentially, you can feel more confident in the code that you deploy by choosing serverless. It doesn't necessarily take away the back end, that there's no need for a backend service anymore, but it offers you the ability to sleep well at night, knowing that even if your platform is going to get a lot of requests, you're still going to be able to scale. There are a lot of other advantages that Cloudflare Workers and serverless as a whole offers you, and I'm sure you hear more about it in this talk. Thank you so much for hanging out with me, and may the force be with you.